So in that situation, it's just damages because your asset is not what you are being compensated for. Whereas in Prabhudayal's case, he was not merely being compensated for his annual percentages which are being received. They had to estimate for how many years this contract would have been valid, and on that basis they had to discount the value. They discounted the value of the future payments. Maybe that concession is for 25 years, it has run for 12 years. So there's a good chance he could have received payments for 13 years. For 13 years, he would have received 15,000 rupees. Those 15,000 rupees would have probably be a lakh of rupees. So if you pay him 70,000 rupees today, it's equivalent to receiving 15,000 rupees over a period of 15 years. So on that basis, the damages were calculated. So in that case, it would have been considered as a capital asset. Whereas in this case, it would have been considered as a revenue receipt. So be careful that, while the facts might be similar, unless this thing is satisfied, that is, there is an extinguishment of the capital asset, you will not get any capital asset in your hands.
So what is the extinguishment in the first case?
The right to receive payments for another 15 years or actually 100 years.
So how do you use the Supreme Court's property right versus contractual right distinction with regard to the second example? Is that distinction easily?
They said it is not a capital asset. They said a contractual right is not a capital asset.
But so it seems perfectly fitting with the second example. But would that distinction also fit with the first?
I think it would, because you are getting a share in a business. It's not a formal share. See, if I tell you that I'm going to give you a share in my company, would you say it's a capital asset or not? It's a capital asset. Only thing is, I'm writing it in a contract. See, it has, though you don't have, see, a share has two aspects. One, a legal aspect, and the second, an economic aspect. The legal aspect is you have become a part owner of that business. The economic aspect is that you get the profits from that business. So what I'm saying is, you will not get any ownership rights. You cannot interfere in my management, but you will get the profits from the business. So that is equally a share in the business. So why shouldn't that be treated as a capital asset? And in fact, if you look at the damages which are paid, it will be paid as a function of the value of that share in the company, not as a function of the value of the services you render alone. Right, so this is slightly tricky, which is why I thought I should give these two different examples and emphasize, how this thing could work out. And just one more thing I wanted to point out, that though this is treated as a capital asset, in the case of one particular kind of contract, what is known as, similar to what Prabhudayal did basically, what is known as a marketing or an agency agreement, right? In an agency agreement or marketing agreement, you agree to locate clients for a person, and you could be paid either a lump sum amount or a percentage of profits. When you locate a client, you can say I'm in the business of selling paints, so I appoint let's say Sarthak as my commission agent or marketing agent, and I tell Sarthak that you get me 5 clients. So now I don't know if those clients are going to be a dud or whether they are actually going to be good. So if they are going to be duds, I don't want to pay excessive amount to Sarthak. So what I say is that I won't pay a lump sum for getting me these clients. We will share, I'll give you 10% of whatever profits I make from that particular client. So that is known as a marketing agreement or an agency agreement. When an agency agreement is terminated, let's assume that a percentage of profits is being paid, and this is a payment as long as he is a client with me, right? It is an indefinite period of time. So it is essentially a share in the profits. So if suppose I breach this agreement, and I terminate it and I breach this agreement, and I say I'll instead give you I'll calculate how much you would have realized from this bunch of clients, we'll agree upon a figure. When I make this payment, it would satisfy all of these tests. It's a share in profits, therefore it's a capital asset. It's getting extinguished, therefore there is instruction of a capital asset, and therefore you could argue it's a capital receipt. But section 28(2)(c) has now said that any amounts paid on termination of a marketing agreement would be treated as business income, in other words a revenue receipt, and therefore taxable. Though as per these principles, it would have escaped taxation. However, anything apart from this narrow framework of a marketing or agency agreement, these principles would still apply, and therefore it would still be you would be liable to, you can escape taxation on the basis of business income. It would be treated as a capital.
So sir, that is extinguished is your right to receive payment.
It's not just a right to receive payment. It's not a mere payment for services. That's what Prabhudayal's case emphasized. If it's just a mere payment for services, it would be still a damage or a revenue receipt, simple damage. But here, on what basis are you calculating the damages? You are not calculating it on the number of hours that Prabhudayal spent in going and securing that agreement. What is the measure for? A simpler way to answer this question or distinguish these two cases is ask yourself the question, on what basis are you calculating damages? Are you calculating it on the number of hours which Prabhudayal spent in locating the mineral and the expenses which he spent in securing the concession, or are you calculating it with reference to the profits which that business generated? If you are calculating it with reference to the number of hours spent, then it's just a mere payment for services, in which case it would be a revenue receipt. But since you are calculating it with reference to the profit, so it has no connection with the services. The amount or number of hours he may have spent for locating that mineral, if it was just by chance, or he just walked into the PWD department and he saw their map and he figured out there was Kantar, it would have been just maybe a day's work for him to figure out how much it is. But the profits have no relation to that. I mean, how much should you give for that? But here you are calculating it on the basis of the business which was established on the basis of that discovery. So in that case, that share in the business is clearly a capital asset.
So what is the right in the business, in receiving the profits of the business? What is that texting?
It's a contractual right. It's a contractual right in the nature of a capital asset. So normally, I don't think I need to explain. This is a slightly more tricky area, which is why I spent some time. But a more simpler, principle holds that when you receive damages, how do you classify it? As a capital receipt or as a revenue receipt? It depends on what the damages are meant to fix. If suppose, let's say I'm in the ship owning business, and someone takes a charter from me for one of the ships which I own, and he doesn't subsequently, though we enter into a charter party agreement, the charter, he doesn't turn up and he doesn't take the ship on hire. When he doesn't hire the ship and he pays me certain damages for it, it would be a revenue receipt. But let's assume he takes the ship on hire and he goes and bashes it against a rock, because of which the ship is damaged. So in that kind of situation, there is a hole in the ship, which I have to recover from him. That would be a capital receipt. So similarly here, if he just pays me for the services which I have rendered, it's a revenue receipt. Instead, he promises a share in the business, and that share constitutes a capital asset. And that capital asset is damaged in the sense he stops making me those payments. So in that case, it becomes a capital receipt.
So, matlab, if the other person is giving you a share in the business as damages, then it will be capital receipt. But if it's giving you a lump sum amount, then capital or revenue?
Yeah, so till now I have actually been considering certain easy examples, I would say. What have we looked at? We've looked at lands or properties. We've looked at shares. Then we've looked at contractual rights. And if you remember, a long time back, we also looked at subsidies. Right? Which was that case? What is the name of that case which we looked at subsidies in? The Government of Andhra Pradesh Incentive Scheme. Right, so whatever. So we looked at that case as well. So obviously I am no Professor Mother, so I cannot recite the case names as he does. So all of these are essentially examples of assets, right? Though the Supreme Court might raise a quibble as to whether contractual rights are property and therefore they are not assets. As far as till now the received legal and accounting principles are reached, these are assets. This is a slightly tricky situation, the subsidy case, because it's just a kind of an receipt which is not even reflected in the books, so to speak, because you get a discount. Even before it comes into your books, that discount is factored in. So I call it as an indirect receipt. There is another category of receipts which create problems. These are forfeiture of loans or deposits. Because till now we have been focusing on assets. We did look at an initial case of a plain receipt. Then we moved on to something more tangible in the form of an asset. So whenever you talk about an asset, you should also remember there is something known as a liability also involved in the equation. So till now we have not seen we have not looked at liabilities. So there is a small situation when even liabilities can contribute to this problem of distinguishing between capital receipts and revenue receipts. Normally liabilities don't enter into the picture. They give us lesser number of headaches than assets. The reason is, whenever you have a liability, when it's created or when it is discharged, when I say discharge, I mean it's paid off. In both of these cases, your income remains unaffected. Do you agree? Because if you remember in the very first class, or one of the very first propositions, if you remember those 4 propositions I said, the first proposition is that not all receipts are income. This very second proposition is that a liability, even though it's a receipt, is not an income. Because why? Because it needs to be returned, obviously. So when a loan is created or when you take a loan, it doesn't affect income. Agreed? The liability when it's created does not affect your income statement. When it is paid off again, does it go to reduce your income?
Sometimes. If you pay interest, that's good.
If you don't pay, I'm talking about, okay, that's correct. If you suppose you pay off only the principal, forget the interest. If you pay interest, you can treat it as an expenditure and you can argue it goes to reduce your income. But even when you pay the principal, does it go to reduce your income? Huh? Have you done commerce in 11th, 12th? So you don't answer. When you pay a loan amount of just the principal, does it reduce your income or not?
It's not counting.
What is the commonsensical answer? If you ask me, if I haven't done commerce, I would say very much was cash in my pocket is reduced. So income is also reduced. Would you guys agree? The non-commerce students, I'm saying. Commerce students, of course, have an established set of guidelines where they know already what assets and liabilities are. But I don't know still why they are getting confused and I ask them these questions. But non-commerce students, at least I think, has an intuitive understanding. At least for me, it was very difficult to grasp this concept that when I'm paying money out of my pocket, it doesn't reduce my income. As far as I'm concerned, any money in my pocket, when it is reduced, I treat it as a reduction in my income, regardless of whether you call it an asset or whether you call it a liability. But the reason why a liability is not treated as reducing your income is, what accountants do remember is that they have 2 boxes. In one box, they create what is known as an income statement or a profit and loss statement, and in the other box they have what is known as a balance sheet. And in this profit and loss statement, or rather in the balance sheet, they put on one side your assets and the other side your liabilities. And what they do is they operate this income account only when they believe that anything which comes in is going to affect your income. And what they say is that the principal amount which you receive normally remains untouched. Right? You borrow it and then you generate profits from your business and you pay off the principal amount. So whenever the principal amount is involved, what they say is that you have cash over here which you generate from your business. Profits go to supply cash, and when you want to pay off a loan, they just write down the cash balance and they say that the income remains the same. There is no reduction in your income. But when you are operating the interest amount, they reduce first your income and then they say that even your debtor account here, which has been increased the liabilities, is also reduced and the cash also gets reduced. So this is the mechanical way in which accounts operate, but insofar as the actual situation is concerned, the other way in which you can probably understand it is just like a liability doesn't create income when it comes in, similarly it doesn't reduce income when it goes out. That's another way of understanding. The reason why I gave you these two boxes is whenever we discuss cases on this particular principle, the cases keep referring to the fact that this amount was transferred to the profit and loss account. I'll tell you when. When an amount relating to loans and deposits gets transferred to the profit and loss account. But since they keep mentioning this, I thought I should give you this big picture idea of what actually happens between an income or profit and loss statement and balance sheet. Normally, in the normal course of things, loans which come in don't affect your profit and loss statement or the income statement. However, the marginal case which we are concerned with, or an exceptional case, is what happens when this loan is waived off. Or what is known as a remission or forfeiture. When there is a waiver or a remission or a forfeiture of a loan, the question is what happens? Does it result in income for you? Suppose you owe someone ₹1,00,000 and for some reason he decides out of the goodness of his heart to waive it, or he decides to reduce it, the amount which you have to pay him, or he just simply forgets about it. In all of these cases, if he forgets about it, do you still owe him the loan or not?
Depends how many years in the land. After 3 years.
So some people are saying after 3 years you don't owe him. Is that correct?
He can't sue. He can't enforce.
He can't enforce, which means you don't owe him. If he can't enforce it, why are you going to pay him?
You might.
Which is correct. I mean, the answer is that because of the Limitation Act, after a certain number of years, certain contractual rights cannot be enforced. So if you cannot enforce those contractual rights, then it's as good as you being given a free check. Right? So because of either of these reasons, because he consciously decides to excuse the loan, like right now, I don't know, you guys know that the farmers are committing suicides at the rate of 1 a day or something like that. Why? It's again all because of these dastardly loans. Since loans are not being excused, farmers commit suicide. Since we don't want farmers to commit suicide, loans are normally excused by the state government. So this kind of a situation, when a loan is excused or a limitation period is over because of which you don't have to repay the loan, are you getting an income or not? Remember, there is no income when it's created, there is no income when it is paid off. So why should this be an income?
Windfall.
Huh?
Windfall.
This would be a windfall, right? This should not be an income, right? So why is it not income? I am showing it in my profit and loss account also. Can I show it in my profit and loss account? What if I show it? Okay, even I don't know the answer to whether I can show it in my profit and loss account. What if I do show it in my profit and loss account? Remember, a liability or a loan when created doesn't get reflected in the P&L statement. When it is discharged, also it doesn't get reflected in the P&L statement. But when it is written off, what prevents me from alerting my investors or my shareholders that see, I actually had to pay so much to my lender, but now luckily he has excused that loan. So my receipts for this year also include the loan amount which has been excused.
But then the liability will be left in your balance sheet. You have
No, it will be struck off, which is why you first you strike off that liability,
Yeah, it has
you
to.
increase your income, okay, and then you increase the equity.
So you increase the cash.
You reduce liability, then you take it to the income statement, show it as income. You bring it back as profits. Those profits you go to increase the equity. So equities and liabilities are shown on one side. Liability goes down. In order to arrive at a balancing figure, you increase the equity. Because it's essentially showing that earlier your net worth is essentially your assets minus liabilities. If your liabilities has decreased, that means your assets or your your net worth has increased because the assets of the business are subject to that much lesser rights of the creditors. Yeah. But see, showing it as income is not a problem for accountants, right? They just have to make an entry where they credit the profit and loss statement or debit it. I don't know I don't use those words. They move it. I just say they move it to the profit and loss statement. Yeah.
So I think the only reason is double entry.
Double entry is not a problem. Double entry, as I told you, I just have to make sure I make an entry twice.
No, I'm saying I think that's the reason why street doesn't need.
That itself cannot be a reason. See, we lawyers are the ones who have to give accountants a reason to treat something as income. Unless we say it's income, those guys will not do anything. And even if they do something, it doesn't qualify if we say it doesn't qualify. Yeah?
So what would be the accounting entry for this? Because you have a liability on the right hand side of the balance sheet, which you would debit to write it off. Which means you have to credit something. You can't credit an asset because that's reducing.
So I don't credit my asset, I credit my equity, capital account.
Your capital is also on the asset side. Can you credit it?
Yeah, capital is not on the asset side. And I don't directly do it. What I do is I take it to the profit and loss account first. Okay, so I credit the debtor and I debit the profit and loss account, and then I credit the profit and loss account and I take that balance to the equity. So that's possible. It's logical. That much I have worked out before I came to that. Yeah, which is why no, you don't need to understand. Which is why I didn't get into it. It's just that the only limited reason why I mentioned it is in the judgments you normally find that they transferred it to the profit and loss account. So all you need to know is that this portion which doesn't normally affect the income statement, it's not treated as income, is in certain cases treated as income, which is why it moves to the profit and loss account. All you need to know is whenever you treat something as income, it moves to the profit and loss account first and then comes in. If it doesn't affect the profit and loss account, you can adjust it within the balance sheet itself. How do you adjust it within the balance sheet itself? When you pay off a loan, your cash balance reduces. Cash is an asset, so it goes down, and the loan account also reduces. So that way it remains within the balance sheet. But in this case, there is no reduction in cash balance, but the liability goes down because the loan is written off. So the loan is written off, so how do you show it? You first take it to the income statement, you show it as an income, and then you bring it back and you increase your equity. So that's one of the reasons why you take it to the income statement, because you need to increase your equity. The loan is no longer there. The loan is no longer there. The accounts are unbalanced because your assets and liabilities need to be in balance. So then what do? What has actually happened is you don't owe that guy money, so it means you have a greater share in your assets. Basically, what does asset and liability mean? Those assets are divided between the creditors and the owners. So if the creditors no longer have a share in the assets, who has the share? The owner gets the share. So you increase the equity. You can't do it just like that. If you do it just like that, a lot of investors will ask, what is this, hanky-panky, how have you managed to increase the equity? So you transfer it to the income statement first. You show this as income. I have got this income this year, which is why I am able to show that the owners have a greater share in the business. Okay, let's get into case laws, and we will see in the next class also how this works out in practice.